Every breath we draw wards off the death that is constantly intruding upon us. In this way we fight with it every moment, and again, at longer intervals, through every meal we eat, every sleep we take, every time we warm ourselves, and so on. In the end, death must conquer, for we became subject to him through birth, and he only plays for a little while with his prey before he swallows it up. We pursue our life, however, with great interest and much solicitude as long as possible, as we blow out a soap bubble as long and as large as possible, although we know perfectly well that it will burst. We saw that the inner being is a constant striving without end, and this appears to us much more distinctly when we consider the nature of brutes and man. Willing and striving is its whole being, which may be very well compared to an unquenchable thirst. But the basis of all willing is need, deficiency and pain. Consequently, the nature of brutes and man is subject to pain originally and through its very being. If, on the other hand, it lacks objects of desire, because it is at once deprived of them by a too easy satisfaction, a terrible void and boredom comes over it, i.e., its being and existence itself becomes an unbearable burden to it. Thus its life swings like a pendulum backwards and forwards between pain and boredom. This has also expressed itself very oddly in this way. After man had transferred all pain and torments to hell, there then remained no thing over for heaven but boredom. But the constant striving which constitutes the inner nature of every manifestation of will obtains its primary and most general foundation at the higher grades of objectification, from the fact that here the will is a living body, with the iron command to nourish it. And what gives strength to this command is just that this body is nothing but the objectified will to live. Man, as the most complete objectification of that will, is in like measure also the most necessitous of all beings. He is through and through concrete, willing and needing. He is a concretion of 1,000 necessities. With these he stands upon the earth, left to himself, uncertain about everything except his own need and misery. Consequently, the care for the maintenance of that existence under exacting demands, which are renewed every day, occupies, as a rule, the whole of human life. To this is directly related the second claim, that of the propagation of the species. At the same time he is threatened from all sides by the most different kinds of dangers, from which it requires constant watchfulness to escape. With cautious steps and casting anxious glances round him he pursues his path, for 1,000 accidents and 1,000 enemies lie in wait for him. The life of the great majority is only a constant struggle for this existence itself, with the certainty of losing it at last. But what enables them to endure this wearisome battle is not so much the love of life as the fear of death, which yet stands in the background as inevitable, and may come upon them at any moment. Life itself is a sea, full of rocks and whirlpools, which man avoids with the greatest care and solicitude, although he knows that even if he succeeds in getting through with all his efforts and skill, he yet by doing so comes nearer at every step to the greatest, the total, inevitable, and irremediable shipwreck, death. Nay, even steers right upon it. This is the final goal of the laborious voyage, and worse for him than all the rocks from which he has escaped. Now it is well worth observing that, on the one hand, the suffering and misery of life may easily increase to such an extent that death itself, in the flight from which the whole of life consists, becomes desirable, and we hasten towards it voluntarily. And again, on the other hand, that as soon as want and suffering permit rest to a man, boredom is at once so near that he necessarily requires diversion. The striving after existence is what occupies all living things and maintains them in motion. But when existence is assured, then they know not what to do with it. Thus the second thing that sets them in motion is the effort to get free from the burden of existence, to make it cease to be felt, to kill time, i.e., to escape from boredom. Accordingly, we see that almost all men who are secure from want and care, now that at last they have thrown off all other burdens, become a burden to themselves, and regard as a gain every hour they succeed in getting through, and thus every diminution of the very life which, till then, they have employed all their powers to maintain as long as possible. boredom is by no means an evil to be lightly esteemed. In the end it depicts on the countenance real despair. It makes beings who love each other so little as men do, seek each other eagerly, and thus becomes the source of social intercourse. Moreover, even from motives of policy, public precautions are everywhere taken against it, as against other universal calamities. For this evil may drive men to the greatest excesses, just as much as its opposite extreme, famine. The strict penitentiary system of Philadelphia makes use of boredom alone as a means of punishment, through solitary confinement and idleness, and it is found so terrible that it has even led prisoners to commit suicide. As want is the constant scourge of the people, so boredom is that of the fashionable world. In middle-class life, boredom is represented by the Sunday, and want by the 6 weekdays. Thus between desiring and attaining all human life flows on throughout. The wish is, in its nature, pain. The attainment soon begets satiety. The end was only apparent. Possession takes away the charm. The wish, the need, presents itself under a new form. When it does not, then follows desolateness, emptiness, boredom, against which the conflict is just as painful as against want. That wish and satisfaction should follow each other neither too quickly nor too slowly reduces the suffering, which both occasion to the smallest amount, and constitutes the happiest life. Men of higher intellectual power are made susceptible of far greater suffering than duller minds can ever feel, and are also placed in lonely isolation by a nature which is obviously different from that of others. Thus here also accounts are squared. But to the great majority of men purely intellectual pleasures are not accessible. They are almost quite incapable of the joys which lie in pure knowledge. They are entirely given up to willing. If, therefore, anything is to win their sympathy, to be interesting to them, it must, as is implied in the meaning of the word, in some way excite their will, even if it is only through a distant and merely problematical relation to it. The will must not be left altogether out of the question, for their existence lies far more in willing than in knowing. Action and reaction is their one element.